Welcome back, friends. I have another read aloud. This is one of my favorite read alouds, Make Way for Ducklings. And this story takes place in the city of Boston. And I actually got to go visit Boston, and they have the park that they have in this story exists, and they actually have the swan boats and everything. And they have a statue of the mama duck and all of her ducklings there too. If you ever get to Boston, you need to go to Boston Commons and check that out. Make Way for Ducklings. There's the official title page, Make Way for Ducklings, by Robert McCloskey. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard is a kind of duck, were looking for a place to live, but every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There was sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. The very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard, so they flapped down. Next morning, they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. This is exactly what the park looks like in real life. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. Good morning, quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water, so the mallards followed them all around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. And they really do have these swan boats where they can take people around the pond in this park. They look just like that. I like this place, said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed out on the bank and waddled along. Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better? Good, said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But look out, squawked Mrs. Mallard, all of a dither. You'll get run over. And when she got her breath, she added, This is no place for babies. With all those horrid things rushing about, we'll have to look somewhere else. Look at the horrid things are bicycles. And she says, Weep! So they flew over Beacon Hill and around the State House, but there was no place there. And in the city of Boston, this tower is gold. It's beautiful, bright gold. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. Then they flew over the Charles River. This is better, quacked Mr. Mallard. That island looks like a nice, quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden. Yes, said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. That looks like just the right place to hatch ducklings. So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until the new ones grew in. That's something that happens to ducks every year. They do what's called molting, where their old feathers fall out and then new ones grow in. And during the time that they're molting, they can't fly because their feathers are not, they don't have enough good feathers for flying. So they have to stay in nests, and they're actually very vulnerable to prey during that time. But of course they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman called Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that, the mallards called on Michael every day. After Mrs. Mallard had laid her 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go to visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water or to have lunch or to count the eggs and make sure they were all there. Those eggs. Can you count them? How many eggs do you see there? One day the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then came Cack, then came Lack, then Mack, then Knack, then Owack, then Pack and Quack. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was such a great responsibility taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very busy. There are all those babies. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Don't you worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she did. She taught them how to swim and dive. She taught them to walk in a line, to come when they were called, to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters, and other things with wheels. Can you count those ducklings? When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Owack, Pack, and Quack fell into line just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. There they waded ashore and waddled along until they came to a highway. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. "Honk, honk," went the horns of the speeding cars. "Quack," went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back again. "Quack, quack, quack, quack," went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Owack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack, quack, quacking. You see her down there quacking? And the cars all honking? They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. He says, "Tweet!" And there's still lots of honking and quacking going on. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop traffic, like this, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. Beckoned means to call over. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down to Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "A family of what?" "Ducks," yelled Michael. "Send a police car quick." Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned onto Charles Street with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Owack, Pack, and Quack all marching in line behind her. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the streets said, "Well, now, ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was the police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from the headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so Mrs. Mallard and the Ducklings could march across the street. Right into the public garden. Inside the gate, they all turned around to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. Excuse me. You see those policemen waving? All the ducks saying goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them, just as he had promised. The ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there all day long. They follow the swan boats and eat peanuts. And you can see, if you look closely, there's the swan boat. Okay, and it's a big pond. And when night falls, they swim to their little island and go to sleep. And that's the end. Another really fun thing about this park in Boston is it has the friendliest squirrels I've ever seen. They will come and eat peanuts right out of your hand, which is fun, but also can be very dangerous. So it scared me a little when I had that happen. Have a wonderful day and come back for more read alouds. See you next time.